Hello friends, this is Jan Curcio and welcome back to Breaking Bread for You with another video in a series in the lead up to the commemoration of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection. The first in this series dealt with the Transfiguration, at which event Jesus was told by Moses and Elijah that it was his time for him to go to Jerusalem where he would die. So I will continue to examine the accounts of Jesus' last journey to Jerusalem with the study of the story of the Queen of Sheba's visit to Jerusalem, found in 1 Kings 10 and 2 Chronicles 9, which might seem to be irrelevant to the Lenten season, but hang in there and you will discover how it ties into it all. Now, we cannot talk about this mysterious Queen of Sheba without bringing Solomon into the discussion, for it was he for whom the queen traveled 1,500 miles to see for herself if this monarch's international reputation of being the wisest man on earth was factual. So what I can say about Solomon can be summed up with what we are told by the writer of 1 Kings, chapters 1 through 11, who tradition holds to have been the prophet Jeremiah. In 1 Kings chapter 3 it is said that at the very beginning of Solomon's reign he was divinely endowed with extraordinary discernment and knowledge of the things of this world, which he for a period of time fully exercised. This is apparent in his successful foreign relations, his spectacular building projects, including his palace and the Jerusalem temple, and his literary accomplishments, such as what we find in the book of Proverbs. At the very end of Solomon's reign, he again exercised that wisdom, evidenced in what I see as his greatest literary work, the book of Ecclesiastes. Yet, it appears that he chose not to exercise wisdom in various areas of his life, but instead led a life consumed with the attainment of mega wealth and women, a lot of women, foreign women, of whom it is said turned his heart from Jehovah to their detestable idols and practices. 1 Kings 11, 1 through 10. Yet there was one foreign woman who we can say did not contribute to his idolatrous behavior, and she was the Queen of Sheba, who, unlike Solomon's foreign wives, believed in the God of Israel, Jehovah. So let's take a look at what we can know about her, who, like many other female characters in the Bible, unfortunately remains unnamed. The only thing that the book of Kings reveals about the Queen of Sheba is that she was a monarch, and we can assume a very prosperous monarch who benefited from the trade of gold, incense, and spices, the most precious of which was frankincense and myrrh, that which she lavished, most likely, on the king during her visit. We know that her kingdom was Sheba. That is Saba in Arabic, home of the Sabaeans, a Semitic people who occupied what is now Yemen in southern Arabia, as seen in this map. Now, the Sabaeans were not Arabs who occupied the northern region of the Arabian Peninsula, but were, as I said, Semitic, descendants of Shem through Joktan, who begot a son he named Sheba, Genesis 10, 22 through 29. Now, given the long and arduous trip this queen took to visit Solomon for the purpose of seeing for herself all that had been claimed about him, we can say that she was intelligent and focused on acquiring knowledge that only Solomon could afford her. And what we know about the queen's religion is that it was polytheistic, as was the case with just about all of the religions in that ancient world. We also know that she would have venerated the Sabaean moon god Almakah, the head god, and his daughter Shamash, or Shemesh, a goddess of the sun. The moon god was worshipped at feast at the Awam temple in the capital of Yemen, Marib. the remains of which were uncovered in 1951 by Wendell Phillips. Now, the Sabaeans believed that their deities were closely involved in their lives, as well as in their afterlife. They practiced divination, believing that they received messages from their deities, as well as from the dead. So let's read the story of the visit of the Queen of Sheba, beginning in verse 2 of chapters 10 of 1 Kings. And it is said, and she came to Jerusalem with a very great train, with camels that bear spices, and very much gold, and precious stones. And when she was come to Solomon, she communed with him of all that was in her heart. And Solomon told her all her questions. There was not anything hid from the king which he told her not. And when the Queen of Sheba had seen all Solomon's wisdom, and the house that he had built, and the meat of his table, and the sitting of his servants, and the attendance of his ministers, and their apparel, and his cupbearers, and his ascent by which he went up into the house of the Lord, there was no more spirit in her. And she said to the king, It was a true report that I heard in mine own land of thy acts and of thy wisdom. Howbeit I believed not the words until I came, and mine eyes had seen it. And behold, the half was not told me. Thy wisdom and prosperity exceedeth the fame which I heard. Happy are thy men, happy are these thy servants, which stand continually before thee, and that hear thy wisdom. Blessed be the Lord thy God, which delighted in thee, to set thee on the throne of Israel, because the Lord loved Israel forever. Therefore made he thee king, to do judgment and justice. And she gave the king 120 talents of gold. That's equal to over $3.5 billion. And of spices very great store, and precious stones. There came no more such abundance of spices as these which the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. Let me say here that amazingly, Solomon fulfilled the mission that Israel failed in, and that was to reveal to the nations the one true God of creation, Jehovah, which he accomplished with the Queen of Sheba, who most likely introduced Jehovah to the Sabaeans upon her return. Further, history has it that Solomon had sent Jews to Saba for trade purposes, who are probably the ones who spread his reputation in that area that the queen had been briefed on. So it is likely that from that time a Jewish community developed in Saba. 400 years later, it is said that affluent Jews migrated to Saba after hearing Jeremiah's prophecies of impending judgment coming to Judah, and apparently they prospered there, even gaining political authority in Saba until a millennium later, when they were dominated by the church. And even later, both Jews and Christians were dominated by the Muslims as they are today. As far as we know, the Sabaeans were conquered by the Himyarites in 25 BC, and after a recovery, they were conquered again by them in 300 AD. And then in the 7th century AD, they were subdued by the Muslims. And for the Sabaeans who did not flee Arabia after these assaults, they fully assimilated into Arabic and later Islamic culture. Most of the Jewish population during the assault scattered abroad, many fleeing to Israel. Presently, merely 100 Jews remain in Yemen. Today, Christian churches are forbidden in Saudi Arabia in spite of the 1.2 million Christians living there who are forced to worship in their homes. And if you are thinking of becoming a missionary to Saudi Arabia, think twice, for the penalty for proselytizing is death. If you ever have the opportunity to visit Saudi Arabia, stop by the oldest standing, partially excavated Christian church of the 4th century in Jubail. Now, getting back to our passage, and in regard to the Queen of Sheba's visit with Solomon, it is said that she, Nasat the king, that is, tested or proved him with Hidoth, that is, riddles or tough questions. So for her to have taken so much time off from ruling Sabah, it is plausible that she was the queen wife of the king of the Sabaeans, who afforded her the time to travel, as she had, not only for satisfying her hunger for knowledge, but to solidify trade agreements with Israel. This would have been necessary given that the incense route, as it was called, traversed from Sabah through Israel to Gaza for access to the Mediterranean coast, from where ships would carry their goods to the various ports around the sea. Now, it must be said here that from a source outside of the Bible, the Kibrat Nagast, the Ethiopian national epic, it is claimed that the Queen of Sheba was the Ethiopian queen Makeda, the mother of King Menelik I, who they claim was the son of Solomon, conceived during the queen's visit to Jerusalem. Further, the Ethiopian Coptic Christians hold to the belief that Solomon gave Queen Makeda the Ark of the Covenant, which is said to have been housed in a highly guarded chapel in Axum, in the northern highlands of Ethiopia. Yet there are some problems with that tradition, the first being that the queen who visited Solomon was from Sabah, not Ethiopia. In fact, the existence of the nation of Ethiopia during the time of Solomon can't be verified, with maps that I have found showing that where Ethiopia would much later be established lies in the kingdom of Cush, just south of Nubia. And concerning the tradition of Solomon and the queen producing a son, I have to say that there is not even a hint that there was any romance going on between the two in the biblical account, which depicts their relationship being none other than platonic, with the focus being on the lending of and acquiring of knowledge. In the effort to sanitize Solomon's and the queen's relationship, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim traditions arose, in which the queen is said to have married Solomon, which begs the question, if she had married the king, why would she have returned to her kingdom? Now, in establishing the time frame of the queen's visit, we know that she could not have come to Jerusalem at the very beginning of Solomon's ascent to the throne of Israel, for it is said that she saw the palace and the temple he had built, which would place her visit after he finished those projects, since Solomon reigned for 40 years, from 970 to 930 BC, and it took him 20 years to finish those projects. It places the queen's visit at no less than 950 BC, from the middle to the end of his reign. Given that Solomon repented at the end of his life, when he turned away from the gods of his foreign wives back to Jehovah, apparent from his writing the book of Ecclesiastes, I take it that it was at the end of his life that the queen visited him. I repeat from chapter 10, verse 1, where it reads, "When the Queen of Sheba heard about the fame of Solomon and his relationship to the Lord, she came to test Solomon with hard questions." That was actually verse 10. Based on it being said that she heard of Solomon's relationship with the Lord indicates two things to me. One, that she was interested in knowing Jehovah, perhaps hearing about all that the God of Israel had done for the Israelites throughout their history, from the Jews sojourning in Sabah And 2, at the time she visited Solomon, he was advanced in age when he had returned to worshiping Jehovah and Jehovah alone. So in trying to establish a time frame for her visit, I would say that it was towards the very end of Solomon's life, which would explain why she would have taken that difficult journey to question him about all that he knew, particularly about the God of Israel, understanding that she might not have that opportunity again. Now that we know the little of what the writer of Kings wrote about this queen and her visit to Jerusalem, let's fast forward to the New Testament to see what Jesus had to say about her. Now, it was during an episode when the scribes and Pharisees were annoying Jesus by asking him to perform a miracle as if he had not already done many in their presence. His response is stunning, and I quote from Matthew 12, beginning in verse 39. But he answered and said unto them, An evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and there shall no sign be given to it, but the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh shall rise in judgment with this generation, and shall condemn it, because they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and behold, a greater than Jonah is here. Verses 39 through 42. Jesus then said concerning the Queen of Sheba, and I quote from verse 42, The queen of the south, that's the Queen of Sheba, shall rise up in the judgment with this generation, and shall condemn it. For she came from the uttermost parts of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, a greater than Solomon is here. According to what Jesus said about the Queen of Sheba, we can know that she believed in Jehovah as the result of what Solomon had shared with her. In addition to her having blessing Jehovah, and I repeat that quote, Blessed be the Lord thy God, which delighteth in thee, to set thee on the throne of Israel, because the Lord loved Israel forever. Therefore made he thee king to do judgment and justice. And accordingly, Jesus states that she will judge in the judgment, the great white throne judgment, the unfaithful Israelites, particularly those who should have known better, the scribes and the Pharisees. So from this we can know that the Queen of Sheba was saved. She heard about Jehovah and she believed in him. So what we can say about the short narrative of the Queen of Sheba's visit to Solomon is that it's about hearing and believing what the Bible tells us about who Jesus is, beginning with the Old Testament prophets who said that he would come, and the gospel writers who said that he did come, the only begotten Son of God, who took the penalty for our sin through his death on a Roman cross. And it is in hearing and believing, as the Queen of Sheba had during her visit with Solomon, that we are saved. And it is in following Jesus, Yeshua, if you please, obeying his instructions found in all 4 of the Gospels, that we stay secure in the unfathomable love he demonstrated on the cross, and that we grow in him, have favor with him, and become like him. And like the Queen of Sheba, strive to learn more about the things of God from the source, the Bible. Keep digging in the text to find answers to what the writer wanted us to know and how we would have us apply it to our lives. Certainly, praying for the Holy Spirit to illuminate the text for you will yield the answers you've been looking for. And if you don't have questions, if you will immerse yourselves in the scriptures, I can promise you that you'll find questions to be answered, plenty of them. Well, it has been a pleasure sharing this study with you, and may the Lord bless you this season by drawing you closer to Him, learning more of Him and His will for your lives. Please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell for announcements of my next videos, and then go to Jan Curcio YouTube channel to view more of my teachings.